Hello and welcome to Give and Toke, the show that elevates the conversation about cannabis to a higher level. I'm your host, Paul O'Donoghue, and today we welcome James Yodgee, who is the General Manager of Partnerships at Biortica Agrimed, along with Matthew Turner, who is the co-founder and Chief Growth Officer of the organisation. Biortica Agrimed operates one of Australia's largest cultivation operations, with greenhouses in Victoria and New South Wales, along with a library of over 1,000 cultivars through Canadian-based Apollo Green. On today's show, we're going to talk about the launch of Apollo Green Australia and all things green farmers and all things Australian cultivation. I really enjoyed this episode because Matthew Turner was one of the first people in the cannabis industry to kind of welcome me into the space, give me a tour of the facility and show me how everything's done. So it's a real treat to bring him on today. There's also a few guest chime-ins from his daughter Hannah, who is a friend of the show, one of my earliest guests. So if you haven't heard the episode with Hannah Turner from way back in 2023, make sure you go check that out. If you enjoy this episode, please make sure that you follow me on Instagram at GiveandToke, get in touch at giveandtoke@gmail.com, and if you want to check out our accessories, we've got smell-proof bags and rolling trays, head to giveandtoke.com.au. But for now, please enjoy my conversation with James Yodgee and Matthew Turner of Biortica Agrimed. Welcome to the show, Matthew. It's great to see you again.
You too, Paul. Thank you for having us.
Pleasure to have you. And James, lovely to meet you. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us.
So I've had the pleasure of visiting the facility in Victoria 2 times now. I'm very grateful for that. Always an absolute privilege. One of my favorite things about the facility, though, is outside of the facility, and that's the local bakery. Are those Parma pies still as good as I remember?
Absolutely. Yes, they're fantastic. We love the local baker, and we've made him a good profit over the years, that's for sure.
Well, as the international man of mystery, Matthew, I know that you're overseas at the moment. Are you getting any good pies in Vegas? Do they exist?
It's a real challenge, but I did find there's a local butcher, and he's an English guy, and he makes amazing pies and sausage rolls. So I'm a regular down there. Yeah. It's an important part of my diet.
James, is the Parma your go-to like me, or have you got another specialty that you prefer?
The Parma's the go-to for me at the pub, but not in a pie, boys. Absolutely not in a pie. I stick to the traditional bit of mushroom, steak and pepper. Just keep it standard.
Well, I look forward to coming back to the facility and getting one of those pies because it's an absolute treat. Matthew, I'm going to kick it off with your background. Today, you're the Chief Growth Officer of Biortica Agrimed. You founded the company with Tom Varga, initially in the role of Chief Finance Officer. Describe what led you to the cannabis industry.
Interesting story. I've always had a love affair with cannabis over the years, and I guess it was a love-hate relationship for a while there because I felt like it was not right for me for a period of time, and I think the relationship coming back to it, and this is probably one of the things I really do like about the Australian system is the medical approach. And I took a totally different understanding of why I use cannabis and why it is good for me. Through that process of maturing, really, is what it's about. So there's always been a strong connection for me, and I've never understood why, but now I've got a much more clearer understanding of it. It actually started with my father, of all people, who was, a real genuine baby boomer, who was in the Australian infantry during the Vietnam period and always had a strong anti-cannabis stance in his early days. So it was interesting that he was the one that brought it to us, but it came from one of his army friends as well, who had motor neuron disorder, like Neil Danaher, and was suffering from strokes and seizures. And CBD really helped him, and he was having trouble actually getting it. And his son ended up sourcing it off the black market because it just wasn't available. This is back in 2016, 2017. And it was legal at that stage, but there was just not much product around. And so my father, who has an entrepreneurial spirit, was very much like, well, this is not right. Australia's got a great horticultural history. Why can't we produce our own? So he set about starting the business really from there, from about 2017. He tried to raise some money. He had a property lined up. He had Ben Ellerton, who's been a long-time friend of mine. I've known Ben since I was 12 years old.
Oh, wow.
Chased him in court when who's our Chief Horticultural Officer now.
I didn't know drummers had friends. That's fantastic.
It's amazing, isn't it? And, so he basically, with Dad, started off on the project. They didn't succeed with the capital raise. And so I'd finished a project with Tom Varga, and my brother rang me and goes, Dad's sunk a lot into this and needs some help. Can you go down and help him? So that's where I turned my attention to helping Dad, and I rang Tom straight away. And I didn't know how Tom would react either because, over the years, Tom's relationship's been not a strong one with cannabis, and I thought, oh, he won't like this. But he'd actually just had one of his very close friends, his wife's friends, actually go through breast cancer and had used medicinal cannabis through that process, through the chemo process. So his attitude had totally done a 180 as well. And so within a flash, he was like, yep, let's do this. He was on board. We went and saw a couple of people to try and help Dad finish the capital raise. They were of the, they were tough to deal with, we'll say, the people that were trying to raise money from, that he was trying to raise money from. And at the end of that meeting, the last meeting we had was in Sydney. We were standing in Darling Harbour, and Dad was 75. He's like, look, I've done my time here. This is now a young man's game. You guys can take the project if you want, but I'm out. So Tom and I looked at each other, thought, we'll give this 30 days and see how it goes. And 30 days turned into 90 days, turned into 120 days, turned into a lifetime in cannabis. So, yeah, that's really the origin story. There's a few little tricks along the way that, that made it a little bit of a story of it was meant to be in some ways. So I picked up Dad's files, and the first property that I found was the property that we now have in southeast Victoria. I found a phone number in there, which was the company that owned it, and I found the CEO's details. And I called the CEO, and surely enough, he went to St Bede's, which I'm an old St Bede's boy as well, so anyone who knows the Bayside area. And he actually went to St Bede's with my cousin, and we hit it off straight away. And we're able to put the deal together, and COVID hit halfway through, so the capital raise was stalled by COVID through 2020. We still managed to close the deal and close the transaction in October 2020, and I guess through a lot of hard work, we redid the facility ourselves. There's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears that went into that first glass house. All of us working together, really to put it together. We delivered on budget and on time, and within 12 months, so October 21, we had plants in the facility. And it was probably one of the fastest to market stories in the Australian cannabis industry. So a lot of things fell our way to make that happen, which really, sort of makes me believe anyway, a little bit in that superstition that it was meant to be.
The thing that I do really love about the Green Farmer's story is the kind of the blood, sweat and tears that went in from day one by everyone involved. There was no one that was hands off, no one, washing their hands of responsibility. I know that you and Tom were in there, reverse engineering what was a herb facility. Is that right?
Correct. One of our Dutch suppliers used to call it salad. It was a salad facility, which we quite liked. So
now it's just a new type of herb. That's fantastic.
Exactly. Yeah. So, you talk to my son Lockie as well, who was, and Hannah, they were the first two employees that came in and helped us and cleaned the house up. And Hannah will remember that story, that's for sure. And then, we pulled apart each table. So there's 120 tables in that facility, all about 17 to 18 metres long, varying in length. We pulled them all apart, re-leveled all the ground, and then rebuilt each of those tables. And so that's just one of the major sort of overhauls that we did, which was all done by hand. And, it was in a very hot glass house through the summer with no ventilation. And, it was tough. It was good fun, though. It was good fun. Really enjoyed it. Yeah.
We'll kind of dig into the nuts and bolts later, but I am curious why the transition from CFO to Chief Growth Officer. What kind of inspired that choice? And I'm sure the fact you're in Vegas right now has a bit to do with that.
It does have a bit to do with it. My wife, Miranda, God bless her soul, she's CEO for MGI, which is a golf company, MGI USA. So COVID, again, one of those little twists of fate, I guess. Through COVID, I was expecting, because she's consumer packaged goods, that they would suffer pretty heavily. There was concern about the business's longevity through a period like that. But it actually had the opposite effect. Social distancing meant that American golfers could no longer drive around in golf carts, so they were walking more. And their product is basically the electric hand trolley that, follows you around with remote control. And it just exploded. The business exploded. So it basically went, I think, about tenfold. In the space of 3 months. It was quite an amazing transformation. So really, we've come across to support her But in the same time, our journey, which sort of ties into today's conversation, as cultivators, we quickly found out that with the amnesty not being available to Australian cultivators, so there was no amnesty with the black market, which we've seen in other jurisdictions. So you couldn't source genetics locally, you had to source them internationally. And then you combine that with Australia's biosecurity, and it's a real challenge to get your starter material going as a cultivator. And so what we saw in the market was not substandard, but not great genetics, basically. And so it was hard work dealing with the genetics that we had in a glasshouse environment where there's a lot of stress factors and things like that. So we were quick to the fact that to be successful, we needed a genetic library ourselves, we needed better starter material, and we needed to offer patients better opportunity and diversity from Australian grown product. And that led us to Apollo Green. And then we acquired Apollo Green mid last year, but it was after a long relationship with them, working with them. So moving here was really about being able to manage that, in a more friendly time zone as well. And then just being a short plane ride across to the guys to help them with building that business up and seeing some of the advancements that we're seeing there in the field of genetics, which is really exciting.
Very cool. We're going to dig deep into Apollo Green shortly, but I want to give James a chance to kind of share your background because, you're the general manager of partnerships and innovation at Green Farmers Biortica today. You've got a bachelor in chemical engineering and an MBA from Monash. From apple to aquaculture, tell us about your path and how it led to cannabis.
It's always a weird entry story into cannabis, isn't it? So look, I was working for a startup as an engineer. It was a failing startup. We were selling all the equipment on site, and I think that week we just sold the Portaloo, and I was pissed. I was angry. And so it was Can Group's old founder, Michael Murchison. So he was coming through looking for some equipment, one of the containers we had set up as a lab, and we got chatting, we hit it off. I honestly knew nothing about what was happening around the globe, particularly in California. So, I started reading about it, got really excited. Conversation kind of went on with the guys that were kicking off Can Group, and they invited me down to check out what they had set up as a little demonstration facility in Doveton. Now, if you know Melbourne, Doveton's probably a suburb that rings a few alarm bells there. But look, I took the plunge, went out there. They had a little container they'd retrofitted to be a little grow facility that you could move around and stuff like that. And it all looked cool. And they're growing tomatoes, not cannabis at the time. But it really kicked off from there. So look, a bunch of roles at Can Group across cultivation operations, the commercial side, and spent a good probably close to 9 years there, and then over to Biortica and Green Farmers kind of late last year. So it's been an awesome time from a company that's going through a ton of growth that Maddie touched on.
Without breaking any NDAs, what did you learn from your 8 years at Can Group that you've been able to bring to this role?
Yeah, look, it was good kind of touching on a lot of different facets of the business across operations and commercial. I think as a new industry, connecting the dots is quite hard. So it's good to kind of, touch across different facets of the business. Look, the biggest thing, and like you said, we're going to chat about it more in detail, kind of the early stages and that slow ramp up, finding genetics, finding talent in terms of to feed into cultivation when the ODC and, we're kind of really against kind of bringing in any people that had or wanted to talk openly about having cultivation experience. So I think a lot of the people that are in the industry from the early days really, felt that slow ramp up, but geez, it's moving quick now and it's just so exciting. So look, I haven't looked back. It's an industry that's can be frustrating at times. It's a crazy mix of people, but some of the most interesting people you run into in your life, and look forward to being in it for a long time moving forward.
I do like Tom Varga's analogy that a cannabis year is like a dog year. It's 7 years of pain and suffering every 12 months, but it is exciting and it is worth it. It might age us all a little bit, but it's a privilege to be a part of it. And I think, Matthew, you touched on it. I think there's something very special and unique about Australia's medicinal industry that kind of helps give an air of legitimacy that maybe other jurisdictions haven't had. I think a lot of people are kind of scared of how people used to use cannabis. You touched on the way your relationship has changed with cannabis over time. Tell me about how it fits into your life today. You did allude to the fact that, you grew up with a parent that wasn't into it. You didn't necessarily know where your relationship was with it. I mean, you've mentioned to me that you've had a couple too many edibles on the Vegas Strip before. Where does it sit generally day to day for you now?
Yeah, I do have a funny story about going to the Severe, but that's for another time. No, look, it's look. I think it's actually an important part of my life. It is a mood regulator and certainly assists with a high stress environment and helps me cope on the day to day. It's an important part of my day to day life. Really, is the way that I view it. I'm not someone who likes to I'm not a huge user of the product. I'll buy an eighth or 3/8, and that'll last me a month, sort of thing. But I do use it regularly, but just not a lot. So I just like to be comfortable, if you know what I mean. So towards the end of the day, my favorite setting, I'll give you my favorite setting because I'll work my day and then I'll go to the gym in the afternoon, and then come home and have a quick vape and then jump in the shower. And that for me is just, I'm in heaven. Leave me there. It's fine.
Don't go into any more detail there, Matty.
Yeah.
Heaven in the shower, mate. Bloody hell.
Oh, modern day post-workout recovery. I'm impressed. James, what about you? Where does your relationship, how did you feel about cannabis growing up? What were the influences around you and where does it sit for you today?
Look, my dad is the modern day Cheech and Chong, in all honesty. He's the Aussie version. So, look, it was always around me growing up, like so many people. But there was a big, I guess, hiatus for a long period there. And then when I entered the industry, kind of really digging into the medicinal side, I had probably 6 surgeries on my left foot. And so it was just this niggling problem. And I felt it was, a mix of anxiety about it and the pain associated with it. And the sleep for me, it's been a massive help. So, it's finding the right strain's always hard and really, it's really personal experience as we all know. But when you're under something that works, it's just an amazing, tool to have in your belt for a busy lifestyle. And if you're someone that really struggles to get to sleep and stay down too.
Matthew, the Biortica Green Farmers situation is a bit of a family affair for you. You mentioned your son being involved. We're very lucky to have your wonderful daughter Hannah sitting in on the pod today. She's a friend of the show, but she's also been a very early guest on the show, one of my favorite episodes. Hannah, I want you to chime in here because you've heard your dad talk about his enthusiasm for cannabis and given his experience with his dad not being keen and then coming around. What's it like to kind of have your dad be pro cannabis these days, and was he always? How did he treat you as a teenager as you were experimenting?
Well, a story comes to mind. I remember I was probably around maybe 16 or 17 at the time, and I think I'd experimented, I'd tried it here and there, and I didn't necessarily really have a strong relationship with it or love it at that time. But Dad must have known something, because I remember just one day being in the car with him and him seemingly out of nowhere asking me, "Have you tried marijuana?" And I just froze and had one of those moments of, oh no, what does he know? I have to be really careful about how I answer this. And I remember answering once or twice and then kicking myself straight away because obviously if it was once or twice, I'd know whether it was just once or twice, which is hilarious to look back on now, especially because his relationship with the plant has changed a lot. So has mine. But even the language around it has changed a lot. And now today, marijuana is a word that neither of us actually use anymore. We prefer to call it cannabis because of the associations with marijuana and the history around that word. But it just, that story really shows me how far we've come, because now we can work in the same company with this plant and give it the respect it deserves and be open with each other about our relationship with it.
Yeah, it's very cool, the connection that you guys have, and that not only do I come out and enjoy those pies, but I enjoy getting my turn of time.
I would have actually said it like Peter Harvey too. It would have been like, "Have you tried marijuana?"
So serious, Dad.
Yeah.
The question I was asked by my mum was, "Have you done pot?" Have I done pot? Yes, it's a hard drug, Mum. Well, fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. And it's always great to kind of know people's backstory and kind of where they've come from and where they're at now. I want to now shift to talking specifically about green farmers. And as we've had Tom on the show before, we have a pretty good background about where things were a year ago. I know the mission is to improve lives one harvest at a time. I know that the footprint of the facilities is growing. What's happening right now?
Yeah, it's a really exciting time for the company. We've got Glasshouse 2 under construction at the moment on the site down in southeast Victoria. We've also got the northern New South Wales facility as well. So there's a lot of work to do still to build out to where we want to be, in 12 months' time. So that's basically the big challenge in front of us. There seems to be a lot of demand in the Australian market at the moment, and things are going very well. We want to be able to replace the imports with locally produced product. We obviously have a very Australian focus in the business, and we see that as the future as well. That we'll never replace all of the product that gets imported. We can't meet the demand with the number of facilities that are in Australia. And I think the barriers to entry make it difficult to get to that start line. And obviously now it's a very competitive global landscape. So for us, really, it's about focusing on getting the consistency in our products, and then also being able to meet the pricing demands within the market as well, because obviously patients need to pay as little as possible while it's not supported by by the government at the moment. We think that might happen in the future, but certainly from a patient's point of view, cost is a real challenge for a lot of people, and we see that. And by expanding our scale and size, we can meet that demand for people. We can help them with that cost. So that's sort of our focus at the moment, being able to produce consistent quality cannabis at a good, efficient price, produced locally by local producers.
Yeah, so when Tom was on the show, he spoke about the partnership and essentially, I believe, the acquisition of Apollo Green Genetics based out of Canada. I know that there's what we're about to see is Apollo Green Australia. So tell me about that. What's going on with Apollo Green and the launch of the Australian arm?
Look, I touched on it before, genetics access for any cultivator locally. It's got easier as regulatory pathways have opened up, and suppliers overseas have figured out how to align with those local regulations here. But geez, it was hard to get genetics back in the day, and it still is really hard now. If you're bringing in seed, it can be 4-month process to bring that in. You've got to pheno hunt that at your facility. It's taking up production space that you could be generating revenue. It can be 18 months until you actually have revenue coming in the other end. So it's a long road in this game. And with the launch of Apollo Green Australia, we've got this ever-growing bank of genetics, from Purple City's one of the big names that have been thrown in there from Oakland, great breeder, one of my favorites. Humboldt, big name in it too. So some really well-known strains, but the important thing is they're breeders' cards. These guys have done the pheno hunting. You're actually bringing in the plant, that exact plant that you see in dispensaries of top cultivators in California and across Canada too. So it's really giving Australian cultivators that chance to compete at a global level and access to genetics that Canadian producers that are dominating the global markets have access to. So it's, in my mind, really leveling the playing field and giving Australian cultivators that chance to claw back not all, but some of that percentage of imports and make it, have it come from locally grown, because fresh is best with cannabis. And I think if you're importing it, you're kind of at a handicap there. So,
well, you mentioned the pre-hunted phenos and the breeder cuts. I think to the layperson that might sound like a little bit over their head. Why is that such a game changer for here? What does that mean, and how does kind of skipping that step of having to do the search yourself so beneficial to what you guys want to do?
Yeah, so the timeline's a big one. If you're popping seed, so germinating seed, building up mother plants, flowering those plants, selecting the best lines. But I think the big advantage of a breeder's cut is that all that work's being done for you, and you're actually bringing in a plant that is that exact representation, be it terpene profile, be it THC, other cannabinoids, aesthetics, all those things that patients and prescribers care about. Someone's done that hard work for you, and you're bringing in that plant and you're finding a fit that works in your facility. It doesn't mean every strain that a cultivator selects from the library will work perfectly in their environment. There still is that requirement to find out what works, and we've set up a model where cultivators can do a bit of trialing before they select what works. But the big one in my mind is trends move really quickly in this market, but reacting to those trends, if you're pheno hunting or if you're trying to source and import genetics yourself, it's a really long road. So being able to swap in and out genetics as part of that genetics as a service model that we offer with Apollo Green is just a massive advantage. So I think it's a big part for competing on the global scale, and then also displacing imports that we touched on before.
What does make Apollo Green stand out on that global scale?
Yeah, look, and I really love the guys at Apollo Green, and part of why we bought the business was because of the people. Relationships are really important, and also knowledge and love for and passion for what you're doing. And the guys at Apollo Green really demonstrated that, and they have a really good tap into what's happening in the Canadian market. They had a great selection of genetics to choose from. They worked with us, from the get-go. The relationship was a strong one. And we've now furthered that by partnering with the University of LaValle in Quebec City, which really is an exciting project, taking the cannabis science to the next level. One of the things about, I guess, genetics in cannabis is that it's been underground for so long, and it hasn't had, I guess, the science applied to it like, other agricultural products. So that's why you do get that inconsistency. And we're talking about, the pheno hunting there. You can pop 5 seeds from the same parents and they'll come out looking different. It's almost like I always liken it to humans. Your brothers and sisters all look different, even though you've got the same parents. You all come out slightly differently. So it's kind of like that. So looking for that pheno, that one good sibling, who stands out above the others.
Are you going to pick your favourite kid while Hannah's sitting here?
Yeah, correct. Yeah. Brother will love that. But it is like finding that, that perfect plant, I guess, that's able to produce the cannabinoids, the medicine that we need, on a consistent basis too. So really what we're looking for with this search, so we're using AI essentially to help do the predictive outcomes from breeding for us. But we're also looking at the resistance to pest and stress in the environment. So we'll come out of this with a lot of knowledge. It's a 5-year program that we're running. So it's not just a flash in the pan. But during that time, they're consistently doing pheno hunts for us as well. So they're doing pheno hunts to build the database for the AI, to do the predictive outcomes for our breeding. And then we're getting the benefit of getting those phenos through our commercial operations. And each of those, we'll just refine the genetics that we're bringing through. And then we'll just keep that line running into the Australian market consistently. Now we've got that down pat, which is not an easy process. We failed a couple of times in getting genetics across to Australia because, you're leaving Canada at this time of year and it'll be minus 20 degrees, as you well know, Paul. You've lived over there. You know what the Canadian winters are like. And then you come to Australia and it's midsummer and it'll be 35 degrees. So transport is difficult for live plant material. But we've got that down pat with our packaging processes now. So they're getting through at a high success rate. We go through the 3 months quarantine and we've got a really strong relationship with the guys at PEQ. We've worked with them, and a lot of people will say negative things about the quarantining process, but they've been fantastic. I've got to say, they really have worked with us and helped us in this process. So hats off, and credit is due where credit is due. So we really feel we've got a good pipeline now coming from that program at LaValle University in Quebec and feeding all the way through to the Australian market. And we're looking at things obviously like the cannabinoid profile, which is, everyone talks THC, but I'm a big advocate for minor cannabinoids, particularly THCV is one of my new favourites that I think is a really important medicine, that is being used in multiple different areas now. And I think that's one of the things from a medicinal point of view that we've really got to focus on. One thing I don't necessarily like about the recreational markets is that sort of that area gets dropped away a little bit and everyone starts just focusing on the T number. So this is an area for us in the Australian market to really bring that research to the fore, to find those minor cannabinoids and put them into use and then find, the right pathways for them. So, we're looking for the cannabinoid profiles. Then we're looking at the actual stress factors on the plant itself. So how will it grow in the indoor environment? How will it grow in the outdoor environment? And then how will it go in the glasshouse environment? These plants obviously react differently. There's a different genetic expression in each of those environments. So it's a complex, I guess, puzzle to put together. But we've got a really good partnership here that I think will help us, find those right puzzle pieces for cultivators in Australia and around the world.
So at Apollo Green, have you got, these Canadian growers actually, growing them for you and putting in this work and understanding what these plants do? Is that how that operation works?
Yeah, so at the moment, I guess the pipeline kind of looks like we're popping seeds at the university. They'll gather the data and basically build their AI database in the background. Then we'll get the phenos from them. Those phenos will, at the moment, we've just now set the facility up in Ottawa to actually run flower in there as well. It's not just a nursery now, but we do have partners there as well that are operating in different environments. Canada, 90% of the people are indoor, obviously because of the winter conditions, but we're also doing outdoor runs in the summer season. So you get to see the expression through the summer as well. So that they help us gather data from different environments, and then we collate that to then bring that to the market commercially, and that also then gets filtered through to the Australian market as well.
You've alluded to a lot of things that make this really impressive work. You know, as a cannabis nerd myself, I hear this kind of stuff and get very excited. I think people in the industry would understand why you're trying to be so cutting edge. You know, you've got this desire to do the job well, get quality products here in Australia. Why should patients be excited about this kind of pipeline of unique and interesting genetics? Like, what's in it for them?
Yeah, I think what we've got is the key, or I guess the challenge for cultivators is consistency. You know, being able to have the plant express the same way time in, time out through all of the seasons, through all of the challenges that you face as a cultivator. And, you know, we've had a number of people come through our facility, and often the feedback you get is, geez, I didn't realize how much work was involved in getting, you know, the medicine to its final stage. And it is a real challenge. Anyone who's a cultivator will certainly know the challenges. You know, it's that's where the dog years come in. So, you know, it is a very difficult process. It's not just a weed. You know, it's more than that. So really what we're going to be able to produce is consistency, you know, having that resilience to different environmental factors, you know, stress factors, so that it expresses evenly each time. That's a really important part of it. But then also looking for the minor cannabinoids, the different terpene profiles, the different, you know, flavonoid complexes that you get through the plant itself. These are all the exciting areas that, you know, we can use in a medical market that really help, I think, establish the plant as its proper place as a wellness and medicine product.
James, with your extensive experience in cultivation and you know, all that time at Can Group, how do you decide what cultivars are worth your time?
Good question. Look, a big part of you got to start with the market and what prescribers and patients want. So, you know, that's a big part of it. But you've also you got to fit something or find something that works for your environment. So, a big part of like what Maddie said around us collecting that data across a whole range of different production systems, be that glass house, indoor, or outdoor. You know, we want to have a data set that we can, you know, supply and present to our Apollo Green customers and say, look, based on the data, this looks like a great fit for you, and based on the market, you know, segment you're trying to hit with that product, here's a couple of strains to give a shot. But the big things you'd be looking at, you know, terpene profile, the cannabinoid profile, lineage and stuff too. It's you know, it's a part of the story there. So you don't want to have a portfolio that's just full of the same hype strains, and you want a bit of the old school, you want a bit of the new school. So kind of having that variability, and then, you know, you get to the economics of growing. Yield is a big factor, but it's not everything. But it's a huge part of it. And, you know, high yielding plants mean the potential for cheaper product for local Australian patients. So it's not something to be poo-pooed. And then look, disease resistance is another big one too. So, you know, botrytis, powdery mildew, all those things, the guys are looking really closely, and you're always wanting to find something that's not going to be prone to that, because when you're in a glass house, you're not going to be able to control the environment, or, you know, in outdoors as well as you can in the indoor environment. So losing a crop, especially if it's a big one, can fold your business, especially if you have a small little cultivator that's running a couple of rooms. So that's probably the main things you're looking for. But I think it's important to just always have that new stuff flowing. Just like any industry, you need to have experimentation going on and hedging your bets in different ways the market is going to head. And that's what Apollo Green's doing for their genetics customers.
So what are some of the exciting cultivars that are, you know, on our way to our shores, or, you know, potentially already here?
The Purple City stuff's the stuff I'm really excited about. Papaya Bomb's doing really well for our customers over in Canada. Been trying to get some into the country, and it's been hard. You know, Pinnacle, Gush Mints, some really famous Purple City strains. We've got some of the triploids as well. So normally having an extra chromosome is not a good thing, but it is for cannabis apparently.
Can you tell me about that? Like, I don't know what those words mean. So, and I can see the enthusiasm on your face. So what does that mean?
So the idea of having so these triploid plants produce, high yields, high density of trichomes, and they have an extra chromosome. So I'm no expert on the science around it, Maddie, butting if you're over it more than I am, but it really means just better economics for growers and better overall product because of higher terpenes and that higher trich density across the product.
Yeah, and it's really about stress resistance and things like that because you have the extra chromosome. It means basically that you can produce proteins easier, and under stressed conditions, you get a more even and consistent result. That's really what you don't get the nanering, you don't get the hermaphrodite situation occurring. It's a feminized plant that won't change on you. That's the concept with the triploids.
You mentioned AI assistance. Now, if you guys have spent any time on LinkedIn, one of the worst things that's happened to cannabis is AI images representing people's storytelling. You'll see the weirdest things. You'll see like a cannabis leaf growing out of a test tube, or like, a scientist that has 8 fingers, like growing plants that aren't real plants. I digress. Why should we not be scared of the AI you are using, and how are you guys using AI?
Yeah, it's a very exciting area, this, and I've got to say I have to contain myself while I speak about this project because it really is a bit of a passion project at the same time as being, I think, really important for the industry as a whole. The algorithm that we're using has actually already been used in agriculture. It's been used for maize and it's been used for soya as well. Obviously, you've got a much bigger DNA database for both of those agricultural products because they've been commercially produced for over 30 years. So what they found with maize, so the guys that were doing the breeding partners, they would bring together, about 6,000 different plants. They'd narrow it down to about 200 plants, and then they'd get to 60 plants before they went, okay, here's going to be a consistent outcome for the seeds produced from these two partners, these two parent partners. So, that was taking them about 2 to 3 years to get through that sort of volume. The algorithm itself gave them 60,000 matching partners. And so far from those 60,000 partners, every single one has produced exactly as predicted from the AI. So it's worked beautifully for maize and for soya, but we don't have the database for cannabis. So essentially what it's going to be able to tell us is, matching these two partners together, what are going to be the dominant traits from these two partners, and what are the outcomes going to look like for your seed format, and then also for your plants that come from that. So really looking at things like, the cannabinoids is always the big ticket items, but getting past that, you're looking at pest resistance and consistency of result, higher yield, these sorts of things. So we really are treating it like a project for cultivators, as well as adding that complexity because it is cannabis and everything is more complex when it comes to cannabis because it is a fast-moving consumer product at the same time. So being able to have a wide selection of breeding partners that can produce consistent outcomes is a really big win for cultivators. But more importantly, it's a really big win for patients because they're going to get better quality product at the end of the day. It's going to be more consistent. We're going to get the minor cannabinoids expressing through. We're going to be able to breed specifically for different outcomes. So it really is, it really is an exciting and sort of cutting edge front of the breeding program that we're running. We're also working with different breeders. So there's going to be some announcements coming out, which is exciting as well. So different old school breeders. One of the things that I've sort of learned since I've been up here is the US is very good at the hype. Canadians naturally don't have that same consistency of hype. But they're producing some good quality cannabis up there at the moment, and they are actually, I reckon, head and shoulders above the US market for what they produce, and it's not recognised. So, a bit of as part of this project, we're going to bring some Canadian breeders on board and give them the chance to really showcase their talents and what they've produced. The industry, as it's been over the years, the breeders have always been the artists. They're the song creators, but they haven't really had the chance to sort of cash in. And in the past, it was, breeders' cuts were always shared underground, and they never got any financial benefit from it. It was all just about recognition and name. This is a way that we can actually give back to breeders as well, showcase their talents, and actually give them some financial reward through the process too.
It is really funny because as we're having this conversation that's all very legitimate and above board, you think back to how recently, and I mean, obviously there's a bunch of states in the US that haven't legalized, but how taboo it still is. And one of my favorite stories is there was a breeder's cut released in Canada, and the way that they got it up from America was they hid it in the petrol cap like cover of their car, and crossed the border with like this singular breeder's cut of I won't say the cultivar because it will identify the person, and that's now on the Canadian market through misdeeds, and I'm incredibly proud of that. I think that's really good, and I think that's where Canadian passiveness really comes into play. They're not hyping it up, they're not screaming that from the rooftops, but they are innovating and they are doing really great things, and I think that's a pretty good indictment on Canadian-American relationships in general. Americans are, the sizzle. Canadians might be the steak.
Yes, yeah, I agree with that. And certainly from a cannabis perspective, you go through facilities through California and Colorado and those places. And the first time I went through a tour through one, I was like, where's the PPE? What are we doing just walking through, just touching plants? They're like, what? And I had a minor panic attack, And then we got to Canada and went through one of the great growers there, Yodgee Nature, up in Quebec there. Shout out to Alex and the gang. They're a great team up there. And, instantly hairnets on, coats on, gloves on, don't touch. It was back to that medicinal sort of style again. And you go, okay, that cleanliness, while it all seems maybe unnecessary to some, actually does produce better quality product at the end. When you're producing it at the scale that commercial facilities produce at, you have to have a really tight ship when it comes to cleanliness. It is a very important factor. And, the Canadians now really do produce good quality, clean product. You can trust what you're getting from the dispensaries there, that you're not going to have mold. You're not going to have, stems and bits and pieces in there. You're going to get really good quality cannabis when you buy from the dispensaries in Canada.
It's kind of hard to convince people that, while America might have better packaging and higher edible limits, ultimately, there's just way better cannabis in Canada. Or overall, like I'd say I've had some absolutely fantastic cannabis in the US that kind of didn't compare to others, but on a consistency level, I always had good cannabis in Canada. So yeah, credit to them, credit to that BC bud, and in your case over into that Quebec bud as well. They know what they're doing over there.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, the Americans do produce great quality as well. So it's not to say that they don't, but certainly what we've seen from some of the facilities here, you sort of do scratch your head and go, okay, that's interesting. That's not, those standards wouldn't fly in Europe. That's for sure. They'll have trouble when the borders do open on the international stage, because I think the international markets now have moved pretty quickly, and they're hard standards to catch up to, and they're expensive. And so the American markets have really raced to the dollar value. They're trying to produce at the lowest cost possible. So therefore, PPE just gets thrown by the wayside. But those standards are really important. Being in Nevada. Funnily enough, Nevada actually is quite regulated. The industry itself here is quite regulated, so it is quite clean product. They do a lot of testing, and I find that really important. I want clean, consistent flower. I don't want to be inhaling anything that's going to have an effect on my lungs. That's an important sort of facet of the industry for me, and that's where I think Australia has got that mix right as well at the moment as well. We expect high standards, we expect clean quality flower, and there is a repercussion if you don't produce that.
James, we still have a huge amount of Canadian cannabis coming to our shores. You've alluded to this already. I've been a loud proponent for Australian-grown cannabis, but there are plenty of people that will say that Australian growers still aren't up to scratch. How do we level the playing field?
Yeah, look, and you'd be an idiot to think otherwise. I think, we've got to remember the Canadians have had a lot of years on top of us. It takes a long time, a good 2 to 3 years to dial in a facility. And then genetics is a big piece of it as well. It's the ceiling potential. It's defines your finished product. But to pair it up with that, I think probably what's held back a lot of local cultivators is just tapping into that knowledge that's probably already there, out in the black market. And you have a lot of smart people that come into this industry, but they have had no experience growing it, and they try and reinvent the wheel. And I've seen that at a number of places. And post-harvest is probably that place where you see the most damage done. It's a really fragile product, cannabis, and it's so easy to do all this amazing work in cultivation, have these amazing genetics, but then to rush you dry and over trim or poorly cure and all that sort of stuff. There's proven methods out there, and I think a lot of producers have been slow to kind of catch on to some of those proven methods. So we'll catch up, and we are catching up. The whole industry. There's some great producers coming online. I know Green Farmers, just the time I've been there, it's every week the product's looking better every harvest, and there's a lot of practice having 2 harvests a week. So I think the Australian market and Australian producers, it's looking really positive. So we're heading in the right direction.
Well, gentlemen, we are going to take a little break from the serious stuff for a bit to have fun with a little quiz. I've learned that you're both fans of Aussie rules footy, which is the only version of football that I recognise, and we're going to have some fun with this quiz. So there are a number of questions here pertaining to AFL footballers with the surname Green. I figured, Green Farmers, we've got green footy players. I'll ask the question, and when you're ready to answer, you're going to shout your name to indicate that you know the answer. There's 1 point for a correct answer. You don't lose any points, but you will lose your turn if you're incorrect. Any questions?
No, just ready to psych out Jimmy James here. You covered that.
What I loved about this is I asked Hannah independently what I should quiz you guys about, and she said football. And then when I asked both of you, you said football. So we're all on the same page here.
We're a bunch of meatheads.
That's it. Well, hang on a second. I did throw 80s surf culture in there as well, just to sort of throw Jimmy off a little bit there, just to put it in my wheelhouse.
That was bullshit, mate. So I'm glad we moved past that one.
We could have gone down the Alan Green from Quicksilver path, but, there's way more footy players with the surname Green.
Yeah. Actually, he was a friend of my father as well, actually. His recent passing is a sad thing.
Yeah, R.I.P. What a pioneer.
Yeah, absolutely. Started making his board shorts on his kitchen table, which is a brilliant Australian entrepreneurial story.
Yeah, it really is an awesome story. And it's, it was a brand I was proud to wear I was more of a skater, and that's kind of where it came in. I had, the dangly belt, and that was always Quicksilver.
Yeah, nice. I like it.
All right, so there are 6 questions here that are multiple choice, and then there will be a final who am I question. So again, just yell your name when you think you know the answer. Question 1. Which Green was a star midfielder for the Melbourne Demons, debuting in 2013? Matthew.
Cameron Green?
That is incorrect.
Denied.
Someone should have waited for the options. I'm going to keep going. Debuting in 2013, he is known for his clean ball use and work ethic. Is it Brad Green, Ben Green, or Christian Green? James, this one's yours.
Brad Green.
That is correct.
That is correct. You're on the board, James. That is...
Quick, Matty. Got to chill out, buddy.
I know. We've been overexcited there.
All right, question 2. Which Green is the current captain of the Greater Western Sydney Giants and has earned... James.
Tom Green.
Give me that one again.
Tom Green.
That is incorrect. I'm going to
Denied.
throw it over to you, Matthew.
Damn it.
You've got 2 of the letters in the name right.
So Toby.
It is Toby
Yes.
Green.
That
Is
is correct.
There are multiple choice options here, fellas. You're getting too ahead of yourselves.
Matty's quick off the mark, though, mate.
It's a highly competitive environment down at Biortica, let me tell you.
He went to my school, so I feel embarrassed now if he doesn't see this.
Oh, really? So you should be.
All right. Well, we're both on the board, 1 apiece. All right. Question 3. Which Green played for the Brisbane Lions and was known for his pace and goal scoring ability during the early 2010s? Was it Jack Green, Ben Green, or Josh Green?
Matthew.
Yes, Matthew.
I'm guessing Josh Green.
That is
That
correct.
is correct.
Uncertain, but very correct. All right. Question 4. Which Green is a talented young midfielder for the Greater Western Sydney Giants drafted... James.
Tom Green.
Tom Green, he got it on this
That
one.
is correct.
Fellas, this is tense. 4 questions, 2 points apiece. Let's see
Here
how
we
we go
go.
with question 5. Drafted at number 55 in 2022, Steely Green debuted for which AFL club in 2024? Was it the Brisbane Lions, the Richmond Tigers, or the North Melbourne Kangaroos?
It wasn't the Kangas, I know that much. Matthew.
Yes, Matthew?
I say Brisbane Lions.
Incorrect. I'm so sorry. So I'm going to throw it over to you, James. There's actually only one option left, so let's see how well you were listening.
Oh, shit. Collingwood. It's Collingwood.
What'd you say?
Was it Collingwood?
No, not even one of the options I gave you. It was the Tigers. So we are still stuck in a deadlock, fellas. Question 6. Which position did Stephen Green primarily play during his time at the Hawthorn Football Club? Halfback, midfielder, or fullback?
Matthew.
Yes, Matthew.
Halfback.
That is correct.
correct.
So, that's 3-2. We've had 6 questions. The final Who Am I question has the potential to be worth 5 points. So, James, there is still a chance to win here. Now, I want you to move away from green, but still stay with the company. That's all I'm saying. So, who am I? I was born in 1977. I was the first Indigenous player to kick 400 goals in Aussie rules football. I twice won AFL Goal of the Year in 1996 and 1998. I played for Fremantle and Melbourne, and my nickname is the Wizard.
Oh, of course it is. Yes, Matthew.
Matthew?
Jeff Farmer.
Jeff Farmer, that
is
is correct. That was worth 2 points where I got to. Our final score, Matthew 5, James 2.
Read it and weep, son.
Dude, I missed that. Gimme, boys. That's gonna days.
Look, all you need to think about, James, is Tom Varga doesn't know as much about wine as he thinks he does. So you may have lost this game today, but Tom went terribly last year, so you've still got that.
It was. I enjoyed it.
Hold that close to my heart.
None.
Well, that was an
You get none.
absolute delight. So thank you guys for playing Name That Green. I guess I'm calling that one. Let's head towards the tail end of our conversation and just look at the state of the nation of Australia a little bit. There's so much to be proud of. There's so much work that we still need to do. You know, this is a very young industry. James, you've worked in medical cannabis since 2017. What are the biggest changes you've seen in that time? And do you think we're in a good place considering how young the industry is?
I think we are. Look, I think the regulatory model's not perfect, but, Maddie touched on it. I think once you move recreational, a lot of that good work on the medical side, it just disappears. Even if there is a medical industry, all the funds move to the recreational side. So I kind of like that there's some great research still happening locally that's feeding into some, a different way to look at genetics and products. So I think that's great. I think the regulatory model, some of the negative things about it, that's probably, it's, desire of patients to want, cheap or, zero fee consults. A lot of that means that clinics are forced to look for products that give them, the best margin and make things work for them. So it's not their fault. It's just what the industry's just kind of fallen into. So I think that kind of lets down a lot of patients not really having, the ability to select the product that's probably best for them. And look, we were chatting about it earlier, a big part of cannabis and finding the right medicine for yourself is being able to handle, being able to smell and have a look and kind of, be a bit more intimate with the product than just looking at a C of A or hearing a name and looking on Catalyst and one of those other platforms. So, we'd love to see that change over time because, THC and total terpenes or terpene pre, total terpenes is one of the most easily manipulated numbers you could have in cannabis, particularly overseas with the C of A's you see over there. So yeah, I think those things are kind of the main things you'd love to see kind of change over the years. But yeah, we're in a pretty good spot though.
Those are things that you'd love to see. What do you expect to see in the next 5 years? What should patients look forward to? What should, avid fans of the industry like myself, what should we look forward to?
I think some of the genetics, I think a real increase in great Australian grown quality. There's some great indoor players coming online now. I think, indoor, the top tier, top quality flower coming from overseas just doesn't make sense. We said before, fresh is best. And I think, supply chain management is something we can do a lot better in this industry, particularly if it's stuff coming from overseas, just sourcing it locally. So look, really excited around some of the locally grown products, particularly from indoor producers and, cultivators that have been going at it for a while, like ourselves.
Matthew, how do you feel about the state of the industry right now?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I like James's answer there. I think there is a lot to like about the Australian industry. And again, okay, the regulatory framework's not perfect, but it's certainly, compared to other regulatory frameworks around the world, a lot better than what they're doing. Again, I'm a bit of a passionate medicinal player. I think it's an important step. I really do see the plant as a medicinal and wellness product. So I do like that framework, and it does keep, as James said, keeps money invested in the research and development side. And I think there's still so much to learn about the plant. I really do want to see that continue on. And again, 100% believe that the T number, I think I saw your head nodding too, Paul. The T number is a bit of a curse in the industry. The COA type shopping is a difficult one. It doesn't actually reflect what the flower is. I'm a big believer in the olfactory senses. The ability to smell the product is the way that was always chosen through the years. So that's a really important lesson for the whole industry to try and grapple with. I did have a discussion with someone from the SQDC, which is the Quebec provincial board, about that very issue. They're moving now to be able to see the product, at least a visual inspection of the product to help that selection process. So it's not just based on T number, but I still think you've got to go that step further. It's got to be the smells.
When we opened our store in Vancouver in 2019, not only 6 months after legalization, we had smell jars and we had the examples of the cannabis out on the table, and we were finding it was costing the store about $350 a week just to put those products out, and it was only a selection of 8 of the probably about 300 things we had by the time I left. And it had to be stored in a safe. So, you'd have to take it off and put it back in a safe. You'd have to write the whole product off. It couldn't then, be gifted to a staff member, used for kind of quality purposes. And it was really difficult to create that tactile experience in, a functional way. And so we ended up just getting rid of that. We opened 4 more stores and we didn't even put the smell jars in. It was decided that it wasn't worth that expenditure. And that is something where a lot of places in America are still getting it right. You go to Oregon, you can have a smell, and those olfactory senses are important. There's kind of a very basic stoner rule. If you like the smell of it, you might like the smoke of it. If you don't like the smell of it, you're probably not going to like the smoke. And we don't get those kind of opportunities. And I think when you're spending $150 on 10 grams straight off the bat, it's a big risk for a lot of people who are in more dire financial circumstances than, many of us are. So I blame Health Canada a lot for that THC issue. The packaging is very plain. The biggest thing on there is a pretty unscientific warning label about all the harm that cannabis is going to do. And the thing that really stands out to the consumer is that THC number. It's like if every product looks the same, and there's 30% THC for $50 versus 20% for $60, it's pretty obvious what people are going to choose. And I do, I'm kind of very vocal to as many people as I can be that I'm not a proponent for plain packaging. I think it puts too much emphasis on THC when sometimes a little bit of branding can be what I think people deserve to connect with. So again, I digress, but the THC issue is definitely a big problem, and it's what drives a lot of people's purchases, and we want to see that change. And I'm sure we're going to see that as you guys bring some incredible genetics to market via your work with Apollo Green. As we get towards the end of the show, I want to kind of end on a positive note and kind of find out what gets you guys excited about cannabis. Where have you seen cannabis done the best? Matty, you get to spend all this time in Vegas. They've got their big giant MedMen stores and Planet 13 and things like that. I'm going to put it to both of you. Where have you seen cannabis kind of done the best around the world?
From my perspective, I actually do quite like the way they do it in Vegas. It's quite well regulated here. Again, the testing is high. It is dispensary based. I've got a good relationship with the dispensary down there, and you always have great conversations. The guys are well enough educated. There's probably still a little bit of that sativa indica type conversation, which I think helps people who are just coming into the conversation. But when you want to get a little bit more nuanced, they can fall short sometimes, and it can be a little bit of take this product, it's the latest special. So that's one of those factors. I think I do like, as I said before, I like the way that Australia does it and having that consultation process. If you do have a good doctor in Australia, then it is a really a good relationship. I was lucky enough to have a really strong relationship with James Stewart. I think he was fantastic. We used to have regular dialogue, not just about cannabis. We'd talk about a number of different things, but it was always a directed conversation with a very knowledgeable person. And I really found that helpful in my cannabis journey and really understanding the plant. And for me, that was fantastic because you didn't just have a bud tender pitching what they've been told to pitch. You had someone with a genuine interest and a deep knowledge of the plant guide you through the process. And that's, I think, a really helpful thing.
Yeah, I definitely, as a bud tender, was guilty every now and then of recommending a product from whichever rep gave me the coolest merch that week. So, guilty. James, what about you, man? Where have you seen cannabis done really well? Or, what place do you have the most fun in, whatever it might be?
Yeah, look, I mean, back in a previous company I worked for, there was a big relationship with Aurora Cannabis. And look, probably not done really right, but I loved the bold move walking into Aurora Sky, so just near Edmonton, and just seeing that sort of scale, and also leaning on large scale production horticulture. I think there's a lot to learn and transfer across to our industry and not reinvent the wheel. A lot went wrong with that facility, as we all know. It's not actually existing and growing cannabis anymore, but I think it was a really bold move. And I think those sort of moves, maybe not as bold, are going to advance this industry and kind of, produce better quality cannabis at scale at better prices for patients. So I want to see more of that sort of stuff in the industry and not just kind of doing the exact same thing.
Hannah, I'm going to pull you in on this one and our next question. Is there somewhere around the world that you visited or you've seen that you just absolutely love?
For me, it was pretty mind-blowing going to the States and really seeing what it is like over there, because I'd only really had experience in Australia before that, and really seen that medical side with a doctor, get a consultation and have it walked through very discreetly, whereas going over to the States and seeing all these advertising, all these colorful products and flavored products and everything was mind-blowing. So yeah, that's been the most crazy experience with cannabis so far. I'd love to go to Thailand though and check that out too.
Yes, I honeymooned there about a year ago, and I've just booked a boys' trip for July. So yeah, all bets are off, and it's going to be very cannabis friendly to say the least. So thank you all for sharing that. Our final segment is called Polls of Wisdom, and though we value the long form conversation, we try to leave the listener with a key takeaway or a dinner party fact or even a call to action. So I'm going to go one by one, ask each of you what is your poll of wisdom. Hannah, it's been 2 years since I have had your last poll of wisdom, so I'm keen to hear where things are at now. Who's keen to kick it off? Who's ready to guide the people?
Hannah.
Thanks, Dad.
Under the bus, Maddie.
I think, when I did my first episode with you, I wasn't working in the industry yet, and I was quite naive to really a lot about cannabis and a lot of the science and a lot about what gives each plant its unique property and quality. And I'm really fascinated about the unique constitution of the plant and how it reacts with us uniquely. And I'm very excited to see a lot of the science coming out about that and really optimizing that matching between the genetic and the person taking it. And I think all of this science that's coming out about cannabinoids and flavonoids and everything, and the more that we study this plant, the more that we learn about it and how it interacts with all of us differently. So that has been just something that keeps me so inspired, and there's just never ending information and knowledge on that. So I'm looking forward to finding out heaps more about it.
James, as the loser of the quiz, I'm on to you next.
What an honor. What an honor. So look, this just for LPs in Australia, your genetic sourcing strategy. So to think holistically about it, it's not just about upfront costs. Sourcing seed and doing it yourself is definitely cheaper up front, but you've got to take into account timelines, the ability to quickly move with market trends in an industry that is so slow. It's how long from taking a cutting to having product out the other end. It's 6 months to finish product, and then add in mother stock development, it's even longer. So and then the big one, thinking about what you want to dedicate your footprint to. Do you want a portion of it going to genetic selection, or do you want it all going to generating revenue and focusing what you do best? So that's what I'd kind of throw out to LPs out there in Australia.
Very cool. And finally, Matthew, your Paul of wisdom.
Yeah, so I guess for me, when we sort of spoke about this earlier, James and I had a bit of a chat earlier on, and it's really that collaboration approach, particularly in the Australian industry. I think it's really important. I think the plant thrives in a network environment, and so do the companies that grow it. Our point of view really has always been as a B2B company to connect and really provide as much as we can to the industry as a whole, to work with people in the industry. And I think from an Australian point of view, we are a small country. We're a little fish in a big pond, and working together is really the way forward. I really want to see that continue. I think the Australian industry does collaborate well. There are also times where we can throw stones in glass houses. And that's part and parcel. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't be held to account for when we don't meet standard. What I am saying, though, is that we shouldn't turn our backs on each other. We should be supportive and collaborative as much as possible, because working together will get better outcomes for patients and for the industry as a whole.
Well, it's an absolute honor to talk to you guys, as you know, as such a massive Australian cultivator, so passionate about enhancing this Australian industry. It's been great for me. You know, I feel like me and Biortica, we're great friends, and I'm really grateful for that. You know, you guys have all treated me very well, and I'm really, really grateful for the time that you've given me today. So thank you for all your insights. Thank you for your expertise. I'm really excited to see what Apollo Green Australia can, you know, bring to the market through Biortica. It's a really great time for Australian cannabis as you guys are leading the charge. So thank you for your time, and then thank you for your work.
Thank you, mate. We appreciate
Thanks,
it.
Paul.
We really love your podcast. We all listen to it, Paul. So keep up the good work.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.